A recession in our future? Are we overreacting in the trade war? Ford says no deals all the way or no way. Liberals backstab the media. Liquor being pulled off shelves. Liberals using trade war to further their chances. And Carney's company dodging taxes. And Canada, one of the wealthiest nations in the world. All that and more on the Really Big Show today. With me, Ian Burns. I'm Jim Check with Kelowna Now. And you see our live traffic shot here in Kelowna. A little bit of a cloudy day, but still a beautiful day, a beautiful morning here in the Okanagan. I'm sure you still got some snowbanks over there.
Yeah, much diminished now. They've shrunk right down, and we've had a lot of rain. But I gather that it's all going to freeze again, and it's probably going to build back up. So very grim.
Yeah, so we're going to kick it off here. The Budget Office calling for a recession, and that's also being echoed by the Bank of Canada. Their modeling suggests that current policies would permanently reduce Canada's real GDP by about 2% over the medium term. And that impact could also be higher or lower depending on the eventual severity of these trade actions and Canada's response to those trade actions. Even the threat of tariffs will harm the economy, says analysts. Heightened trade uncertainty could weigh more heavily on business investment and household spending. And that's one of the big things. Businesses and people want certainty, and it's really hard to invest when you lack certainty.
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, this all just, for me anyway, it diverts my thoughts to the person that started this, Donald Trump, and what it is exactly that he's trying to achieve. Because what he's achieved so far is the destruction of the American Western alliance, friendships that were built up over more than a century, and he's achieved a massacre in the stock markets. Why, I don't really know. But he keeps trying to say that, come to the US. Every business, please come to the US. Leave places like Canada and Mexico and come to the US and everything will be excellent for you. But I just wonder, are businesses, after he's shown himself to be so unpredictable and wacky, are businesses going to look at America as a safe haven? I mean, it might even raise questions there. So, but definitely, for whatever's going to happen, we can already say, I think, that even just the words that have come out of Donald Trump's mouth have caused a serious hit to Canada's economy, and
I would
it's very sad to see.
I would say that we always need to look for the silver lining, just like in COVID, there was, like as devastating as that was, like, and the same with this, I think it's so devastating for a lot of people and the certainty thing, but it also may bring attention to something we've been neglecting for 10 years, that Canada is the wealthiest nation in the world when it comes to our natural wealth, and it has been suppressed. We'll talk about that later. We're going to talk a lot about that later. So maybe we can look at it as a blessing in disguise, but definitely right now, it looks absolutely painful for Canadians.
Yeah, let's hope. I feel like the worst case scenario would be that some kind of accommodation is arrived at. We basically go back to more or less free trade with the US, and then none of these changes that are so desperately needed, like to be more pro natural resources, interprovincial trade and things like that, that none of that actually goes through because the same old special interest groups
Right.
lose the will to change. But let's fingers crossed. Let's hope that something can actually change.
I also want to make a note there. We did get a donation. I want to thank Bruce I won't say his last name unless he wants us to say it. He says he's a regular listener and he wanted to donate money for the show, which is great. We appreciate that. We get zero funding from the government. And obviously, what's happened lately, it's definitely harder and harder to keep media outlets going. And there's 3 more that are going to close in the Lower Mainland here. Those are Glacier Media Products. And I think Burnaby Now. I can't remember the names, New West or something. I can't remember the other 2 names, but definitely appreciative of that. In their next story, Steve McDonald, a reporter, attended a kind of like a trade summit there at UBCO. And there was some, and we had Ross Hickey on there, UBC Okanagan economist there. And his advice is it's like in the video we played yesterday, he says, do nothing right now. He's on the tariff threat response panel at the university. He says, don't harass him, don't badmouth him, and don't pursue him. Dust yourself off and make yourself more attractive to other suitors. And that's kind of like the stance that Mexican president has taken right now. That's his thoughts. And then also there is Nick Arkle, the CEO of Gorman Brothers, a really prominent business here in West Kelowna here. And he agreed with Ross Hickey's do nothing solution. And at this point, and he says the U.S. needs Canada's wood, so our efforts will be to work directly with our U.S. customers to share the burden of the situation. And then, yeah, so that's some of the responses there. Any thoughts on that, Ian?
Generally speaking, I would say that what they're saying is economically sound, isn't it? That, I mean, it's really hard to argue against it from the perspective of economics or business or finance or anything like that. The world of numbers and graphs and charts and everything. This is absolutely 100% the right thing to do and to advise governments to do. But it's not that simple, is it? Because we're not just talking about nerds with spreadsheets here, are we? We're talking about the entire nation of Canada has been insulted, and it's that then leaves the rational world of economics and finance, and it enters, not just politics, but something even deeper than that, like national identity and questions, like very, very deep questions that go to the core of what it is to be Canadian and what Canada is, what Canada's for, and all sorts of questions like that. So I feel like in that scenario, it's a bit harder. And I do think the Mexicans, as we've seen this morning, that they've just got a reprieve while Canada doesn't have one yet. The Mexicans have in many ways been smarter, or the Mexican government, let's say, has been a lot smarter, though the president has made some pretty sort of sharp comments about Donald Trump and sort of tried to defend the dignity of Mexico and all that kind of thing from his insults. But in general, she's kind of kept her powder dry and kept her mouth shut and left it to just like one or two lines. And then, like we were saying yesterday, just let Donald Trump jump around like a fool and then change his mind, as he inevitably will, and as he just has done. But the only thing I would say is Trump has not threatened to annex Mexico. He's not threatened to abolish Mexican sovereignty, but he has done that to Canada. So it's of a different kind of quality, I think, his approach to Canada.
Yeah,
So
and
in
this
that, I mean, you have to remember this isn't just an economic response. This is about like there are so many ingredients here. It's very, very difficult to actually implement this advice from these business people and economists.
Yeah, so this panel also pointed out that our current climate change policy doesn't allow for fossil fuels to generate electricity in favor of running instead in favor of the hydro. And we do import a lot of electricity out of Washington. So when Doug Ford threatens to turn off the electricity to the United States, I mean they could do the same thing to British Columbia. So we have to really be watchful of this tit for tat thing right now. And it says BC should immediately be able to use natural gas to create electricity to reduce our reliance on the U.S. So there's some things that we've done that have actually put us at a disadvantage. Also on the panel was Grant Stevens, Kelowna's largest employer, KF Aerospace. And he's saying aviation is a global industry. Parts are manufactured in Canada, exported to the U.S., and we import parts from the U.S. as well. The first thing we do is we can figure out where suppliers outside of the U.S. That does mean doing a lot more work with Airbus and that. So there is our economies are so intertwined. People forget that so much. That's one of the big things. One of the other things, I'm going to try and reach out to a farmer from Richmond, was saying this is going to devastate the agriculture industry because a lot of the product is sent to the U.S. And maybe there's a silver lining there too, that maybe some of the prices of produce will go down in Canada because there was a lot of stuff going on in Ontario. We can actually drive across the border and buy the product cheaper in the United States than you could buy the product that was actually grown in Canada. And I think a lot of it had
Yeah.
to do with our dollar, right? Like our low dollar, which a lot of people argue is artificially depressed so that it's more attractive for our producers and manufacturers to actually sell to the US for the higher dollar.
Yeah, well, it's also the tax regimes that differ. I mean, that kind of arbitrage has basically always been possible in with Canada and the US, hasn't it? The US has been pretty much throughout history, it's always been cheaper to get it in the US because they are more resistant to taxes. But I mean, as a consequence, they obviously have much lower life expectancy and human development index and all things like that. I mean, in many ways, living in America really sucks
I
because
did
of that.
watch.
Because
I did, I did watch a piece, a lady that typically in the Lower Mainland that goes through the Peace Arch crossing there, and they go down there on daily visit. They go down there and they buy groceries because it's cheaper. So they go to the States almost like once a week, or they go down there and just for a day trip, they go down there and buy groceries and get gas, and that's all cheaper. And then they crossed back into Canada, and they were charged. I think her bill came out to $300 or 290 Canadian, and they were charged an additional $295 in tax, in duties and tariffs and all this stuff. And she was just like, what's going on? Because they've never really ever said that. But so that's been something that's been put into place at the border crossings right now. So consumers that were used to going to the States to get cheaper groceries and cheaper gas are now going to get pay more as they bring that
yeah,
back.
it's brutal. And obviously the Americans who need to come to Canada to buy their insulin to stay
Yeah, so that's
alive because they can't afford it in America, they're going to suffer too.
that's
But
that.
I'll also just say about, just before I forget, it's very unfortunate for KF Aerospace that it's so proximate to Boeing, isn't it, really? Because I mean, it makes
Yeah.
sense. Boeing's just like, it's literally just there in Seattle, isn't it? It makes sense that you do business with Boeing. And it's really unfortunate, I think, for KF Aerospace because Boeing is a clown show. Why would you want to do business with Boeing anyway? It's a completely crap company. Airbus is so superior to Boeing that it almost seems laughable to call them both air companies, like airplane manufacturers. Airbus is an actual manufacturer of functional aircraft. Boeing is something that you laugh at because it doesn't work. And it's so unlucky, I think, for KF Aerospace that because of the geography, they basically have to do business with Boeing, don't they? It's not really economical to go all the way across the world to Europe via the Pacific to do business with Airbus. So I just wanted to sort of highlight how unfortunate that is that they're so close to a dysfunctional company.
So this UBCO Okanagan economist Ross Hickey saying we need to dial back the rhetoric, but definitely Melanie Jolie, Justin Trudeau, and Chrystia Freeland definitely not dialing back the rhetoric. They're actually amping it up because they see it as a way to improve their chances in this upcoming federal election. They've really gone hard on this, to the point where Doug Ford came out and said, "Don't boo the national anthem." And I totally agree with that. Why are we booing the national anthem? We fought shoulder to shoulder to protect both flags and world wars, and we're booing their national anthem. Whereas you said yesterday, Melanie Jolie is actually very proud that we're booing their national anthem.
Yeah, well, she's kind of yeah. It was Trudeau as well. They basically said like they basically tried to like justify it and say that's why we're doing it, you guys. But it's I mean, for God's sake, like I'm surprised that this is such a this has been such an important point of discussion. It's been such a like significant point of discussion that like a couple of hundred people in like a stadium here and there are booing. I mean, it's like it's trivial, really, isn't it? But
Mm.
I think that seems to have got itself kind of front and center in this debate, and I'm not really sure why. But just to go back to your point about Freeland and the Liberals, I mean, and also Doug Ford as well, they're doing what they're doing for for their own domestic audience. We often hear that, don't we? When Trump says or does something incredibly stupid, usually you'll get some kind of journalist or analyst will pop up and say, "Oh, this is mostly for a domestic audience." It's like it's quite a patronizing way, isn't it, to respond to the US president. But I would say that also applies to the Liberals. That also applies to Doug Ford. They're not really negotiating with Trump or anyone. They're not doing anything for the world. It's completely domestic. They're doing it for their own power, for their own prestige within Canada.
Well, it's a weapon that the Liberals have found to works really well for them during COVID too, is to vilify somebody to the point of, and then and drive that hate and fear, and then get them to rally around them, and it's worked, and it's been something that's worked very well for them, and they're definitely not giving up on it.
Yeah, well, politics is a cutthroat business. That's a very nice way of putting it. It's actually a business full of immoral, slimy people that you wouldn't want to invite round your house for, a hot dog. It's full of scoundrels. And they've seen an opportunity, like you say, that really works. So even if that might be to the disadvantage of the country or to huge swathes of the country, they're going to do it because that means that they get to keep their jobs. That means that they get to succeed. That means that they get to walk into rooms full of journalists and be the center of attention, which is all they've ever wanted in their whole lives. So, they're going to keep doing this as long as this works. As long as the polls show that this is working, they're gonna keep doing it. They're gonna go harder and harder, most likely.
So Doug Ford was on a radio talk show there, and he says he vows no parley. I guess I don't know. He must watch Pirates of the Caribbean. No surrender. Canadians must not parley with the U.S. on half tariffs and hoping of averting a full continental trade war. And he says, "I'm the only guy with a backbone to go after Trump." He said on that talk show, "We want zero tariffs, and we don't want half the amount of tariffs." And he said, if it comes down to it, the lights are going off. And they asked him if that's something he's willing to do. And he said it would be a last resort. And again, that would be a great caution because he turns the lights off there, and they turn the lights off here, and the gas, and I don't know who wins in this escalation war.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of it's terrible to even see that it's got to this kind of you know miserable position, isn't it? I mean, the reality is, like we said yesterday, um, the Canadian federal government and the provincial governments, due to decades of stupidity, unforgivable stupidity, have not created a pipeline to the east from Alberta. So if we turn off their electricity in New York and Michigan or wherever it is, then they're going to cut the gas that also goes through Michigan. They and then people in Toronto and Montreal and Ottawa are going to be paying like God knows how much for gas because then it would have to be transported by truck or train, I would imagine. I mean, what a nightmare that would be. So then it would become like a real war then, wouldn't it? It'd be like who can hold on the longest? And I don't know. I mean, it, would it be the Canadians? Trudeau seems to think that the answer is yes, that it would be the Canadians. He seems to think that Canada's loads more united than America is, but I wouldn't be so sure.
I find it odd that Justin Trudeau's done more in the last 2 weeks than he's done in the previous 10 years. It's kind of weird. He's supposedly done. And we had a story about Justin Trudeau here next. You did the story. Arrogant and misguided. Liberal government attacked over five-fold increase in meta spending. And I'll let you explain this because it's basically stabbing the media in the back here.
Yeah, well, I'll try and summarize it. The Canadian government, or the Liberal government, put through a bill called the Online News Act, Bill C-18, which in effect was going to charge Google and Facebook for linking to news in Canada. It's going to charge them a bit of money because the federal government said they've got a monopoly on advertising and it's really hurting journalists and journalism in Canada. So we're going to just like basically levy this bit of money off them, and then we're going to give that money to journalists. Facebook reacted to that by saying, if you do that, we're going to take news. We're just going to ban news in Canada, which is why, if there are any, to all the Canadians out there listening to this, if you go on Facebook and type in whatever, CTV or Kelowna Now even, it'll tell you that you can't see it. You can't see news on there. So the government did enact it. Facebook did ban news, and then all hell broke loose. And then the federal government, Justin Trudeau, all of them started to say that Mark Zuckerberg was dangerous. Facebook was anti-democratic. It was full of misinformation and all this kind of, the usual sort of insults. And the federal government said it spends about $10 million on advertising every year with Meta, and it's going to stop doing that. This was about 18 months ago. So, yeah, so the summer of 2023. So more than 18 months, actually. And then we got to a point where somehow the CTV got hold of a tip, and they learned that the federal government was again advertising on Meta, so they'd broken their own boycott. They weren't sticking to their guns, and it was $100,000 at that point when CTV got it. I then did my own little bit of digging, and it was about $300,000 after I finished my dig, and then I've gone back to re-dig the grave of this story. and I did that a few days ago, and it's now over $1 million. So they're hoping that they can just keep doing it in the background and that nobody's going to really pick up on it or care. But I mean, basically, they've created this horrible situation for news. Facebook's punished them for doing that and punished us. We've lost, like, the likes of us, but all media companies in Canada have lost huge amounts of revenue because they can no longer share stories on Facebook.
Half the revenue, half the traffic for the most part for most media outlets, and many have closed already. And I think we did the story
it's
on
killed a lot.
Close to 100 have closed in the last year, and there's 3 more closing here in the Lower Mainland. And this is what this has done. And the part that's insulting to this is that they say they're here to protect local journalism, and they selectively fund certain outlets like CBC and CTV and that. And then they basically don't fund others, and they basically cripple them by not allowing them to have news. And then they go out now and they said that social media is so important for people to get their news that now they're spending our tax dollars to advertise on Meta, which they said was basically the devil.
Yeah, and this picture that we've used here, we took that picture of Justin Trudeau last, can't remember last May, I think it was, when he came to West Kelowna to talk about wildfires. We managed to sneak in because the Liberal Party tried to prevent us from going there because they don't seem to like us very much. But we managed to sneak in and we asked him a question about this, the news blackout. And he went on like a 2.5 minute classic sort of Justin Trudeau soliloquy where he said, he basically said, we're never going to bow down. This is a test moment. It's either us or them kind of thing. It's like, it's democracy or it's Facebook. And we're going to hold tight and blah, 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 blah. You can imagine exactly how it went. Or, go on our website to watch it if you want to have a laugh. And then lo and behold, here he is now overseeing the federal government, which is throwing 7 figures at the moment. Presumably that's going to increase.
Wait for the
7
election.
figures at Meta.
Wait for the election, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's hypocrisy on a level that you don't often get it so clear cut. It's not usually this black and white. Hypocrisy is usually wrapped up in all kinds of, like, there's usually somebody that comes out and will say, oh no, like, actually it does this, it does that. It's like there's usually a bit of defense somewhere, but this is completely transparently indefensible and it's so obviously hypocritical. And that is why, if anybody's wondering, that's why you haven't heard about this from any of the rest of the media, because the rest of the media in Canada, just about, with a few exceptions, is paid for by the federal government in part. So they're not gonna, bite the hand that feeds. So you're not going to hear about it on CTV again. Anyway, they did do a little story. You're not going to hear about it on CBC. You're not going to hear about it any of these places because they're all getting the salaries of their journalists in part paid for by your taxes.
I would recommend that everybody go on Kelowna Now and read this story in full. And there's a link to, at the bottom of that story, there's a link to about 20 stories that we've done on this issue. And I would also recommend you read it for a couple of reasons. One of those is that the reason that the power hasn't been held accountable is exactly what Ian just said, is that the media is getting a lot of their money from the government. And the reason we're probably into 10 years into this without accountability and transparency is because the media definitely is not. And even right now, if Pierre Poilievre wins government, a lot of them are going to lose their funding. So it's in their best interest not to go after the Liberals, but to go after Pierre Poilievre. So just look at that and look at the logic there. And when you have a government that decides who's media, who isn't media, and selectively funds some and then cripples others.
Yeah. And that is, in a roundabout way, even if you're a Liberal, if you're interested in transparency and the media scrutiny of the powerful, you should probably vote for the Conservatives, because if the Conservatives win a majority, then the media will start doing their job again and actually scrutinize them because they don't like the Conservatives.
Yeah, there you go. We got to move on because we got lots to get to. We've got a clip here to play from a local liquor store here in Kelowna. Kent Mulgat went out, and we're going to play a clip from that. I think we're going to play about like the first 52 seconds of this.
Liquor stores, you're not going to find any Kentucky bourbon on the shelves, but you will find some California wine. Why? Because in this province, under Premier David Eby, the strategy is to target states that elected Donald Trump and not those that didn't. So, how is the public reacting to it?
Off of the Republican states, I Yeah, I mean, if it has to come off, it has to come off.
Yeah, it sounds kind of bizarre. I would have thought you'd pull all American booze be equal.
I think that it's ridiculous, but the NDP are absolutely ridiculous, and Evie should resign.
So you don't like the plan?
No.
Interesting. I find that very weird that it's just selecting from Republican states that you can't buy anything here.
It is different.
It's strange. Not something that I would have expected from these tariffs.
I think if they're going to pick on any.
Yeah, there you go.
You cut off the English woman there. There's always an English woman in Kelowna. Whenever we do these streeters, there's always one English person.
Yeah, you can go on kelownanow.com. You can watch that full interview. That did really well on our YouTube channel there. So go take a look at that. Ken Mulgat used to run the CTV bureau desk here. We have lots of experienced journalists, including Ian Burns here, used to work for the Daily Mail. And then Steve McDonald, I think 30 years with the Daily Courier as the business editor. And then Josh Duncan, I think he's been here close to 10 years now. Megan Trudeau, who's been here for quite a long time. And then the other journalists, Cheyenne and Corvin, all trained journalists through institutions. Yet our federal government says we are not a qualified journalism outfit, obviously because we don't toe the line, I guess.
Well, you're forgetting that the expert panel that made that determination is led by a woman who 30 years ago spent a few years at the CBC, but isn't a journalist now, hasn't been one since. So, I mean, you have to remember, we're talking about like serious powerhouses of journalism here that made that decision. So, tread carefully, Jim.
Yeah. Anyway, Danielle Smith. Actually, just to say that, we just got a response back from Pascal St. Onge on our, we sent in a package and said that, you're crippling local independent journalism when you say the opposite. And she basically says, oh, we support local independent journalism. We refer you to the website. Just like,
Cheers, Pascal. Nice one. Her actual Canadian Heritage, the department that she leads, has been ignoring my emails now for about a month. I've been asking her about the Meta story that we just discussed. She's just literally, her media servants have literally just stopped responding to my emails because they don't like the story.
And we got a clip to play for you later that, and we'll compare it to that. But anyway, we got Danielle Smith here, who's also, what's that? What's that, Rommel? No, I played it. Okay, play the Danielle Smith clip here.
And all Alberta municipalities purchase all needed goods and services from Alberta companies, from Canadian companies, and from countries with which Canada has a free trade agreement that is being honored. Second, no further purchases of U.S. alcohol or new VLTs will be permitted through the AGLC until further notice. We'll just have to drink a bit more BC wine and Alberta craft beer and spirits, and that's just fine with us. Third, I'm directing my government to assist our grocers and other retailers with labeling all Canadian products in our stores and ask them to voluntarily purchase their stock from vendors in Alberta, Canada, or countries that we share free trade agreements with that are being honored. Our government will also augment these efforts with a substantial advertising campaign to assist Albertans to more easily access information about where various products on store shelves are from. I understand as well that there's at least 4 apps that have been created in recent weeks and months that can assist Albertans in doing this. And fourth, my government will enter into free trade and labor mobility agreements with every province that is willing to do so. The goal is to have no exceptions, just free trade and free movement of Canadian workers right across our province. I also want to point out that Canada has a secret weapon in this trade conflict with the United States, a trump card, so to speak. And it is located directly under our feet, and it is called Alberta Energy. You see, Alberta happens to have one of the largest deposits of oil and natural gas on the planet. It is significantly larger and far more accessible than the quickly declining oil and gas reserves located in the United States. Whether the U.S. president wishes to admit it or not, the United States not only needs our oil and gas today, they are also going to need it more and more with each passing year once they notice their declining domestic reserves and production are wholly insufficient to keep up with the energy demands of U.S. consumers and industry, let alone having anything left over to export as they do today.
There you go, Danielle Smith with a more, I guess, less volatile response, right?
Well, she kind of kept her mouth shut for as long as she could, didn't she? Because I think she was trying to adopt more of the Scheinbaum approach, and she was trying to just let Trump be a moron and kind of wait for the dust to settle. But I think, the last few days with the tariffs actually going into effect, I think her patience has evaporated really. And she said, one of the things that she said at that news conference was all the talk about annexation of Canada, in her words, has broken the trust between our two nations in a profound way. So, she obviously always knew this and felt this, but she was kind of keeping it under her hat for a little bit, wasn't she? Because she thought that was in the best interests of Alberta. But I feel like now that Trump has well and truly, done the dirty on the relationship between Canada and the US, I feel like something has snapped really, and now she's telling it like it is. But she took a hell of a beating, didn't she, in the press and from her fellow premiers and the prime minister for her approach. But
Now let's play that clip.
it's
We'll play a clip right here that kind of ties into what you just said. Go ahead, Rommel.
Now, Pierre Poilievre, who wants to be Prime Minister for all Canadians, has a choice to make. Either he stands up to fight for all Canadians alongside all premiers and the federal government that are doing that, or he chooses to stand with Danielle Smith, Kevin O'Leary, and ultimately Donald Trump.
The king of the paintbrush. He loves to label people.
Yeah, that's yeah, you just have to call that unfortunate, don't you? Ill-judged, perhaps. And this is at the same time he's talking about how Canada's all united, and just this morning he said that. He's like, we're all on the same page, we're totally united, unlike the Americans who are so divided. But obviously we're not united, are we? Because Danielle Smith is there to be punched in the sort of like metaphorically in his world. She's just a target.
Alberta's been the punching bag of the federal Liberals for, the past 10 years, blocking pipelines, environmental hurdles, and all kinds of things, including the tech project that Tech walked away for Frontier, that Frontier project where they walked away after investing $1.5 billion. All of these things, and again, if you look at it, Alberta is the crown jewel of Canada, that and Saskatchewan, right? Those two provinces are such big contributors to Canada's GDP, and they get almost zero respect. And here's Justin Trudeau again throwing Danielle Smith under the bus when it seems like she has a very rational and sane response to this, right? And it's definitely not a response that is traitorous, as like some people have called her.
Yeah, and it isn't just minerals, I should say. It isn't just natural resources. Alberta and Saskatchewan are also younger. They're the youngest of the big provinces in Canada. And, anybody that's read about demographics or knows anything about demographics knows how important they are. So that means that they're going to have a lot more workers. Like their worker to retiree ratio is going to be a lot better than Ontario's and Quebec's for a long time, for a generation. So if you think we rely on Alberta now and Saskatchewan, just wait and see how much we rely on them in like 15 years, because it's just going to increase.
One of our watchers or viewers here said that AI revolution will lead to more energy needs and more need from us, and that's 100% true. Even with, Trump may be looking at their current needs for energy, but with AI, that energy need is astronomical, and the only people that can supply it is Alberta, Saskatchewan, British Columbia for that matter, and even the hydroelectric that comes out of on Quebec there. So energy is our key, and it is one of the things that has been suppressed here for the longest time. And maybe, like I said, that people will look at it and look at who's been doing the suppressing, and then see that we need a leader in this country that will actually free our resources and maybe let them out of the gate here. We're going to talk about that in a bit, though, too. But here's the reaction from Donald Trump with regarding the. I'll let you talk about this with Mexico here.
Well, yesterday. This man is just. He's a very peculiar man. Even if he was just like a normal dude on the street or somebody you knew, he would be such a weird guy. But anyway, yesterday he sent out a piece of paper. He gave a piece of paper to his press secretary, who read it out, which said that because Ford, GM, and Stellantis had requested it, he was gonna have a 1 month reprieve on the tariffs for car companies, car manufacturers that are part of the USMCA free trade agreement. Very, very weird. Anyway, and then she was asked a lot of questions about that, but obviously she didn't know anything because it was just a piece of paper. So she kind of she tried to explain it, but it made no sense. Then this morning, Howard Lutnick seemed to have a little bit of a clue about what might be going on. So then he said, we might expand this, the USMs to the whole of the USMCA. So everything covered by USMCA would be exempt for a month until April the 2nd, and that's when his reciprocal tariffs go into place. So he said maybe, and then okay, there's another bit of confusion. And then about an hour later or something like that, Donald Trump sends this out saying Mexico is off the hook. So Mexico's free now, but Canada isn't. Canada's still we're still under the boot of this 25% tariff. But I imagine he's gonna lift it on Canada as well. But it's just complete, clown show as usual with Donald Trump. But I mean, something that is interesting anyway. I watched that interview with Howard Lutnick, and what he said was, he said it's highly likely that it's going to go back to the USMCA in effect. So they're going to resurrect that treaty until April the 2nd. But then he said, keep your eye on Canada. Like, he highlighted Canada and he said, for example, their dairy, the tariffs that they put on dairy, he said that's finished now. Like, that's not going to happen anymore. So I think it suggests to me that kind of all along that's what they wanted. They just wanted to bully the Canadians into dropping the tariffs on dairy, which are indeed crazy. They're very, very high.
And I know the digital
So-
services tax is another one.
Yeah.
We got to push along here because we got about 22 minutes left. We've got quite a bit of stuff here to get through here. And then, and this is Jonathan Wilkinson, the Natural Resources Minister, says that like Donald Trump's claim that he doesn't need Canadian energy, and he said that's that's not a reality. And we kind of talked about that. And Daniel Smith says the same thing. So I believe that like Donald Trump does say a lot of things that may or may not be completely true, right? I mean, that's one of his biggest problems is he says stuff that is conflated, I guess is a nice way to say it, right?
Well, nobody on the planet can click their fingers and produce 4.5 million barrels a day of oil. Even the Saudis can't do that. So obviously that's bollocks. And Wilkinson there is just pointing out the obvious, that's just nonsense.
And that was another Holly Dolan Blacklock story. And we got another one here in the Liberal leadership race here, kind of like Carney. Carney getting himself into more trouble. No comment on his tax record. Liberal leadership contender Mark Carney says he would not discuss the tax planning of Brookfield Asset Manager to avoid billions of dollars in Canadian payments while he served as the chair. Brookfield's tax avoidance was legal but obscene, said an MP. And we're going to play that clip here from the MP. Let's play that clip first here from from about the 122 mark to the 215 mark.
Which brings me to Mark Carney and Brookfield Asset Management, the person who has been touted as having the solutions to our economic challenges. And yet Mark Carney is very much the poster person for the broken system, the hollowing out of Canada that has made us so vulnerable today. Mark Carney has a clear track record of pushing for wealth accumulation for the rich at the expense of workers and Canadian communities. A 2023 report from the Centre for International Corporate Tax Accountability and Research called Brookfield Canada's top tax dodger. In 2021, Brookfield Asset Management dodged a jaw-dropping $6.5 billion all on its own, according to Canadians for Tax Fairness. In 2021 alone, Canada lost $30 billion in corporate tax revenue.
So there you go, and Mark Carney's statement there in the Holly Dolan Blacklock story. It says, "I love our country," said Carney. "Canada has given me everything, my family, my education, my values. In return, I'm ready to give everything for Canada." The Canada Revenue Agency has estimated the tax gap, the sum of all taxes owed but avoided, is worth $28.7 billion annually. That figure includes 11.4 billion in annual unpaid corporate tax. So there you go. Mark Carney, definitely, it's a typical liberal, like rules for thee and not me. Is that how it works?
I think the important thing to stress here is that was an NDP. That was one of the main NDP, you know, shadow critics or whatever title she wants to give herself. So that was an attack on Carney from the left, which we haven't seen much of lately. And that was very left wing, wasn't it? That was about tax dodging. That was about corporate irresponsibility, that kind of thing. That's not the sort of critique you would expect from the Tories. So it's interesting because it's kind of new. It's a new angle. So that's one interesting thing. And then the second one, which is a corollary to that, is anybody listening to this, type in to Google Nikki Ashton, Mark Carney, and go to the news tab and tell me what you see. Because I have a suspicion, having done it about an hour ago, that you're not going to see anything. It hasn't been reported on. CBC, CTV, Globe and Mail, none of them have touched this. And that is very, very, very interesting, that they are effectively shielding Mark Carney from a left-wing critique. That's very, I mean, think about that for a while. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, you'd think this story would blow up because this is something that, even in the States, Elizabeth Warren's, Elizabeth May's and all that are just like Jagmeet Singh's and all. But where's Jagmeet Singh's comments on this too? I guess maybe he will because, that was an NDP MP that said that. So it's kind of like ludicrous that our mainstream media is not picking up this story. Just the same as they're not picking up.
Because it's bad. It's bad for Carney. It splits the left vote. That's why.
And it doesn't pick up even the meta story. That is huge. That is a huge story. It's such a hypocritical story, and it's not being picked up. So.
Yep, because it affects them negatively. I mean, the media, it's not free. They present themselves, and Melanie Jolie presents them, and people like Melanie Jolie present them as being these sort of like objective guardians of Canadian democracy, sort of like judges or something from a cartoon. In reality, they have their own interests and their own objectives and their own prejudices. And as a consequence, if somebody from the left threatens to split the vote on the left, which they broadly support, they will not report that story. They won't do it. They won't touch it because they don't want the left to be split and harmed, because they want the left to win. They want the Liberals to win. And when it comes to the media malarkey, they don't really care about that because they're getting millions of dollars in taxpayers' money to prop them up by this government, by the Liberal Party, and they don't want to upset that apple cart.
This should be of huge concern to Canadians because this is why we're in the predicament we are, and it's just unreal. Here, and let's play Ruby Dalla though. Ruby Dalla, who won't go away after they kicked her out of the Liberal leadership race. Here's Ruby's latest comment.
First day on the job as Prime Minister, I would have ended the carbon tax. I think Canadians are paying way too much tax as it is. We need to ensure that Canadians are not having to pay the price for industrial polluters in our country. I would also have Canada withdraw from the Paris Accord. Over the last number of years, we have spent $7.5 billion helping other countries to achieve their environmental goals, to achieve their climate reduction goals. I want to start investing in our country and utilize the dollars that we are spending abroad right here.
There you go, Ruby Dalla, still embarrassing the Liberal Party. Then we have the Polymarkets graph up here to show you this is not really a race at all. According to the Polymarkets, this is a coronation. Mark Carney with a commanding lead at 98%, and Chrystia Freeland with 2% of the vote, even though she says she's the person to lead this nation. And then Frank Baylis and Karina Gold, really don't even register.
Yeah, well, I would just say on Ruby there and Frank, another just to follow what I said, the press aren't providing coverage of a left-wing critique of Mark Carney, but they're also not providing coverage of a right-wing critique of Carney from within the Liberal Party, because both Frank Baylis and Ruby Dalla have criticized Carney from the right. I mean, in Frank's case, just about from the sort of business right. But you have to bear this in mind. There's a lot of criticism of Carney out there from people within the Liberal Party, from the NDP and so on. But where's the coverage? People wouldn't know about it. If they're not sad enough to like go and watch CPAC like we do and follow it on Twitter, they're not going to know about this because it's not. He's being shielded.
Yeah. Here, we're going to play the clip from Justin Trudeau when, he gets mad when people say Canada's broken. He said nobody should ever say Canada's broken. And that's the same thing. Chrystia Freeland, Karina Gold, all of them say that you shouldn't disrespect Canada by saying it's broken. Here's a clip from Justin Trudeau in 2015. We're going to play this clip for you.
This place belongs to all Canadians. It belongs to you. But after a decade in power, Stephen Harper thinks it belongs to him. So now, this place is broken. Today, I'm presenting a real plan to fix it. Thomas Mulcair wants us to spend years wrangling over the Constitution. But I know Harper and his government are the problem. And the way to fix this place is to change the government, not the Constitution. Replace this government with a better one. That's what real change starts with. Our plan creates a truly transparent and open government that will put an end to the secrecy and scandals of the Harper decade. Of course, it will reform the Senate, but it will also do much, much more. After all, Harper broke a lot more than just the Senate during his decade in office. Our plan will modernize government and bring it into the 21st century. We'll open this place up so you can see what's going on, hold us accountable, and contribute more directly to what happens here. We'll shift power away from the back rooms to make sure your MP will be your voice here in Ottawa instead of Harper's voice in your community. We'll fund, support, and respect scientists and researchers so they can develop the solutions that we all need. We'll replace the Unfair Elections Act with reforms that encourage all Canadians to vote, especially young Canadians, and that make those votes count. But most of all, real change means we'll give our parliament, our government, and our democracy back to you.
Well, there you go. I think maybe he should watch that. I guess that Dan Alba said that he's pulled that from his feed. That's no longer there, but a lot of people are putting it out there because, when they say you're not allowed to say Canada's broken, yet that's what he used when he ran his campaign. We have somebody following us here on TikTok saying, "Where's our critiques of the Conservatives?" And I would say the Liberals are in power, and our job is to hold power accountable. Pierre Poilievre really has no power other than to campaign at this point, right? And we do hold him accountable when he makes things, but he doesn't really have any decision-making responsibilities right now. All he can do is criticize the government, and that's what
I would say as well. Look at our back catalogue, where we have criticised the Conservatives quite a lot actually. And if you want, I'll give you one for free, and I'll say, where are they? Where are they right now? Where are their serious policies? Why are they not? Why are they not like absolutely up to the neck in detail, coming out every single day with policy announcements and ideas? That's and I'm far from the only person making that criticism, but they're basically sleepy, aren't they? Sleepy Pierre Poilievre, as Donald Trump might say.
And to be fair, the left-leaning media, CBC and CTV, and that do a hell of a job of beating up Pierre Poilievre every day. What do we need to jump in on that? They do a really poor job of beating up on the Liberals.
Indeed, and this is kind of this happens in the US as well, and I think it partly explains why Donald Trump is acting so erratically, is because he's quite right when he says that he's faced really tough odds because the media and lots of institutions have been against him and his party. And I think that kind of when you're genuinely persecuted, as he has been in the United States, I think that makes you a bit more radical. And I feel like something similar to that is going on in Canada, and we should be careful because look at how nuts it is in the US. We don't want that to happen here, and that's what happens when you don't have like a serious objective media and you don't have objective institutions. So there's an important point there,
I think this D1 guy is a bit of he's a screamer there because Pierre's job is to criticize. He is the opposition, the official opposition. And and he's now saying that we're saying Trump is right. Come on. If you listen to our stuff on a regular basis, we do nothing but criticize Trump. So just stop saying stuff that You know what I mean? Like just full of half truths. And now we're going to skip this next one by Elizabeth May because we're running out of time here. Trudeau announces $20 billion in childcare. Again, like I said, he's out there campaigning hard, and I think he's got like what? Tomorrow's his last real day, like if a work day. We won't even spend much time with him there. And then this map here, which I think is really important to put up here. You put this in here today, so I'll let you talk to this map.
Yeah, it's just CBC did a story about minerals, and the list that the federal government has is 34 critical minerals that are really important for, things like cell phones and computers and AI data centers and all that sort of stuff that people are probably used to hearing about now. And then they spoke to some experts, one of whom said Canada used to be historically the best country in the world for mining, but now doesn't really seem to take it all that seriously anymore. And then this map is from the federal government, and it just gives you an idea. It's just one map. I mean, it's not like 100% comprehensive, but it just gives you an idea of the gold mine, in some cases literally gold mine, that we're all sitting on here on this gigantic landmass of Canada. Just look at it. I mean, it's just completely littered with everything that we need: nickel, zinc, copper, cobalt, tungsten, all of this like rare earth elements there, all this stuff that is like, it is the new gold, and in some cases it's the old gold as well. I mean, it's almost unlimited. The potential is almost unlimited, and I think this map kind of hammers that home.
In the interest of time, we're going to skip the next couple stories here. We're going to go to benching our best, how Canada's political strategy mirrors a mismanaged hockey team. And that's a post I did on LinkedIn. If you want, because a lot of people don't understand politics, but they do understand hockey. And if you look at that map that Ian's talking about, that we just talked about too, it's basically we benched our best and we put out like a minor league team. We're investing supposedly in wind and solar and all that stuff, but we benched our best, oil and gas, LNG, our mines and everything that can really contribute to our superstars, really, that contributed to the building of Canada to begin with. But for the last 10 years, they've been put on the bench and they've been hamstrung. They've had their skates taken away, and whatever you want to use for that analogy. You can go to my LinkedIn, you can read that story. But this image here happens to be Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux and Larry Murphy there after scoring. And if you ever watched hockey, that's the best hockey game ever. Scoring the game-winning goal in Game 3 of the Canada Cup, 1987 Canada Cup, one of the best hockey games ever. And that's available on YouTube. You can go watch it. But let's get to markets. Gold, like kind of just bouncing around there, right? Like looking to challenge that $3,000 mark, but still hanging around there. Bitcoin chopping around there too, like hanging in there. Not much activity there for both of them. They're just kind of chopping in this uncertainty in the market. You can put up the Bitcoin chart there, Rommel. But the Canadian dollar actually saying it might think, because like Mexico got that reprieve and they're going back to the USMCA, and I would say the Canadian dollar says we're going to get that too. So we'll see if that turns out to be true.
I would expect that it will happen, yeah.
The Canadian dollar believes so, right? And the markets believe so. So there you go. In AI and tech world, there's driverless Ubers taken to the streets in Texas, and it's not Tesla, it's actually Waymo. And then I'm going fast here. And the LA Times introduces an AI editor. There you go. AI coming to a news article near you. Hey?
That's a weird one. It's to do with a controversial stance. Well, that's very weird. It's for their It's for their editorials. Okay.
Yeah. Interesting, eh?
Mm.
And then we've saved a couple minutes here for our memes. And like who doesn't love a good meme? And this is again from the address to Congress the other night. So a husband holds up the false paddle during an argument with wife. Everybody's got to go out and get some paddles now, right? Instead of like shouting at each other, you can just have a paddle.
I want one of those. Yeah.
That's right. And just like hold it up and say, no, you're wrong.
Yeah. What was the other one? Save Medicaid. I want one of those as well.
I mean, if you think of it for your wife, you can say, can I go out with the boys? You always say no. And then another one from the Babylon Bee is wife forced to buy a second phone after reaching maximum number of open browser tabs.
I think that should also be I don't think it's just a female thing. I think that's also kind of people over a certain age as
Well,
well.
that's
Like
that's
when
a
I
me
look at
thing.
my dad's or my mother's, they have like 60 plus tabs open. It's just completely nuts.
I think even on my phone, that so many apps are open at the same time, and it's maybe I don't even know. Is there a close all at once? Because I go and I keep swiping, keep swiping, keep swiping to close them all every now and then. But yeah,
I mean, they should just automatically close, shouldn't they? It becomes a hassle at a certain point.
yeah. So that's our show for today. We do thank you for watching, and again, a big shout out to Bruce who sent us a contribution for what we do, and he says he's a regular listener. So regular listeners, we appreciate you as well, and make sure pass this along to other people as well. And get them to subscribe and watch this. We do this daily, Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. It's about an hour-long show, and we're almost an hour long. I'm about to do the big white snow report update here. That's at 10 o'clock. And then later today, I have Gavin Dew, an MLA for Kelowna Mission here for the BC government, and he's going to talk about the latest in the BC budget and also the tariff reactions here and stuff like that. So not a lot of good stuff in the budget as far as investing in British Columbia, and definitely that's going to be one of the things that's going to be, I'm sure that the Conservatives are going to be challenging the NDP on. Any closing thoughts, Ian?
Yeah, I think the BC Conservatives have attacked them on a lot of things, haven't they? And I think you're obviously going to be talking about the budget, but also I think there's a lot of valid criticism to be made about how little action has actually been taken. There's been a lot of words, but where's the action? And I guess it's up to Gavin Dew and the BC Conservatives to actually put like solid, real ideas forward. So it will be interesting to hear what he has to say. But I'm also interested in his take, I'm sure you'll ask him, on allowing California wine and Oregon and Washington wine to still be sold in BC, because that is pretty much the number one competitor, isn't it, for alcohol in BC, like the number one foreign competitor. I mean, it's one thing to get rid of crappy American whiskey that nobody likes anyway, but California wine, that's the real target, surely.
Yeah, so we have a really big show tomorrow. That'll be our last show for the week, and if you have any comments or thoughts on our show, we would appreciate them, and we look forward to chatting with you tomorrow morning. And big thank you from Ian and I for watching the Really Big Show on Kelowna Now. And thank you, and have a great day.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.